Tom Tit Tot. The power resident in a person's name is a feature of folklore in widely dispersed cultures. It is very likely that this native English version of the imp and his secret name was current in the British Isles for many centuries before it was driven out by the Grimm brothers' exportation of the German form, now better known in Anglo-Saxon countries, Rumpelstiltskin. The secret name, and the forfeit which has to be given if it cannot be discovered, is widely reflected in folk tales. There is a cognate of Tom Tit Tot in southern Nigeria, the hippopotamus called Isantim. The tale is found in places as far apart as Iceland and Italy, Mongolia and Sweden. In Cornwall, the secret name is Terrytop, in Scotland, Whoopity Story, in France, Rictin Ricton, and in Magyar, Dancing Vargaluska. This English version, taken down from the words of an East Anglian woman a century ago, is beautifully told. The folklorist Joseph Jacobs thought it far superior to any of the continental variants. Once upon a time, there was a woman who had baked 5 pies. When they came from the oven, they had been so overbaked that their crusts were too hard to eat. So the lady said to her daughter, "Maiden, you just put those pies on the shelf and leave them there, and the pastry will get soft." But she didn't say, "They'll get soft," really. She said, in the way they have in East Anglia, "They'll come again," meaning the same thing. But the girl, hearing these words, said to herself, "Well, if they'll come again, I'll eat them now." And she sat down and, there and then, ate them all up. When it was time for supper, the woman said to the girl, "Go and get one of those pies. I expect they've come again now." The girl went, and she looked, and there was nothing there but the pie dishes. So she went back to her mother, and she said, "No, they haven't come again." "Not one of them?" asked the mother. "Not one of them," she said. "Well, whether they've come again or not come again," said the mother, "I'll have one for my supper." "But you can't if they haven't come," said the girl. "But I can," said she. "Go and bring the best of 'em." "Best or worst," said the girl, "I've eaten them all, and you can't have one until it has come again." Well, the woman was really angry, and she took her spinning to the door to spin, and as she spun, she sang, "My daughter has eaten five pies today. My daughter has eaten five pies today." The king was coming down the street, and he heard her singing, but he could not make out the words. So he stopped, and he said, "What was that you were singing about, mother?" The woman was ashamed to let him know what her daughter had done, so she sang, instead of that, "My daughter has spun five skeins today. My daughter has spun five skeins today." "Well," said the king, "I never heard of anyone who could do that." Then he said, "Look here, I want a wife, and I'll marry your daughter. But take note, 11 months of the year she shall have all the food she likes to eat, and all the gowns she wants to wear, and all the company she cares to have. But the last month of the year she'll have to spin 5 skeins every day, and if she does not, I'll kill her." "All right," said the woman, for she was thinking what a fine marriage that would be. And as for those 5 skeins, well, there would be plenty of ways of getting out of that. Most likely he'd forget about it. And so they were married, and for 11 months the girl had all the food she wished, and all the dresses she desired, and all the company she wanted. But when the time was ending, she began to think about those skeins, and she wondered whether the king still had them in mind. But not one word did he say about them, and she thought that he must have forgotten the whole matter. However, on the last day of the last month of the 11, he took her into a room which she had never seen before. There was nothing in it but a spinning wheel and a stool. "Now," he said, "now, my dear, you will be shut in here tomorrow with some food and some flax, and if you haven't spun 5 skeins by nightfall, your head will come off." And away he went about his business. Well, she was very frightened indeed. She had always been a useless girl, so much so that she did not even know how to spin. What was she to do tomorrow with nobody to help her? She sat down on a stool in the kitchen, and how she cried. Then she suddenly heard a hard kind of knocking on the door. She jumped up and opened it, and what did she see but a small black thing with a long tail, who looked at her strangely and said, "What are you a-crying for?" "What's that to you?" she asked. "Never you mind," he said, "but tell me what you're crying for." "It won't do me any good if I do," said she. "You don't know that," said the visitor, and its tail twirled around. "Well," she said, "it won't do any harm, even if it does no good." And she told him all about the pies and the skeins and everything. "This is what I'll do," said the little black thing. "I'll come to your window in the morning and take the flax, and bring it spun at night." "What would you charge?" she asked. It looked out of the corner of its eye and said, "I'll give you 3 chances every night to guess my name, and if you haven't guessed it before the month is up, you shall be mine." Well, she thought, she'd be sure to guess the name before the month was up. "All right," said she, and how the thing twisted its tail with delight. Well, the next day her husband took her into the room, and there was the flax and the day's food. "Now, there's the flax," said he, "and if you haven't spun it by night, off goes your head." And then he went out and locked the door. He had hardly gone when there was a knocking on the window. She leapt up and opened it, and there, sure enough, was the little old thing sitting on the ledge. "Where's the flax?" he said. "Here it is," she said, and she handed it over. Well, when evening came, there was a rapping on the window again. She got up and opened it, and there was the little old thing, with 5 skeins of flax on his arm. "Here it is," he said, and he gave it to her. "Now, what's my name?" "Is it Bill?" she asked. "No, it is not," he said, and he twirled his tail. "Is it Ned?" "No, it is not," and he twirled his tail. "Well, is it Mark?" "No, it is not," and he twirled his tail harder, and away he flew. Well, when her husband came in, there were the 5 skeins ready for him. "I see I shan't have to kill you tonight, my dear," said he. "You'll have your food and flax in the morning." And away he went. After that the flax and food were brought, and every day the little black imp came, morning and evening. And all day the maiden was sitting thinking of names to say when he came at night. But she never lit on the right one, and as the days approached the end of the month, the imp began to look really malicious, and twirled his tail faster every time she made a guess. At last it came to the last day but one. The imp came that night with the usual 5 skeins and said, "What, haven't you got my name yet?" "Is it Nicodemus?" she asked. "No, it is not," he said. "Is it Samuel?" she wanted to know. "No, it is not," said he. "Well then, is it Methuselah?" "No, it is not that either," he said, and he looked at her like a fiery coal and said, "Woman, there's only tomorrow night, then you'll be mine." And away he flew. Well, she really did feel horrid. But then she heard the king coming along the corridor. In he came, and when he saw the 5 skeins, he said, "Well, my dear, I can see that you'll have your skeins tomorrow night as well, and as I reckon I shan't have to kill you, I'll have supper in here tonight." So supper was brought, and another stool for him, and down the 2 sat to eat. Well, the king had not had more than about a mouthful when he stopped and began to laugh. "What is it?" she asked. "Because," he said, "I was out hunting today, and I got to a place in the wood which I hadn't seen before, and there was an old chalk pit and a sort of humming sound. So I got off my horse and went very quietly to the pit, and I looked down. Well, what should be there but the funniest little black thing you should ever see? And what was it doing but spinning wonderfully fast with a little spinning wheel and twirling its tail? And as it spun, it sang, 'Nimmy, nimmy, not, my name's Tom Tit Tot.'" Well, when the maiden heard this, she felt as if she could have jumped out of her skin for joy. But she didn't say a word. Next day, the thing looked really nasty when he came for the flax, and when night fell, the girl heard that tapping again on the window pane. She opened the window, and the imp came right in on the ledge. It was grinning from ear to ear, and how its tail was twirling. "What's my name?" it asked, as it gave her the skeins. "Is it Solomon?" she asked, pretending to be afraid. "No, it is not." As he said that, he came further into the room. "Well, is it Zebedee?" she said. "No, it is not." And then it laughed and twirled its tail until you could hardly see it. "Take time, woman," it said, "for there is one more guess and you're mine." And it stretched out its black hands at her. She backed away a step or two and she looked at it, and then she laughed out loud and she said, pointing a finger at it, "Nimmy, nimmy, not, your name's Tom Tit Tot." When he heard that, he gave an awful shriek and flew into the dark, and she never saw him ever again. The Silent Couple. A famous Scottish ballad, The Barring of the Door, is essentially the same tale as that of the Silent Couple, which is one of the world's most widely distributed folk tales. It is found in Turkey and Sri Lanka, in Venice and Kashmir, in Arabia and Sicily, and quite possibly in many other places as well. If it came from the East, its route to Scotland is mysterious. If it originates in the West, how it found itself in several distinct Asian cultures is no less intriguing. This is the Arabian version. Once upon a time, there was a newly married couple. Still dressed in their wedding finery, they relaxed in their new home when the last of the guests at their feast had left. "Dear husband," said the young lady, "do go and close the door to the street, which has been left open." "Me shut it," said the groom. "A bridegroom in this splendid costume, with a priceless robe and a dagger studded with jewels? How could I be expected to do such a thing? You must be out of your mind. Go and shut it yourself." "So," shouted the bride, "you expect me to be your slave, a gentle, beautiful creature like me, wearing a dress of finest silk, that I should get up on my wedding day and close a door which looks onto the public street? Impossible." They were both silent for a moment or two, and the lady suggested that they should make the problem the subject of a forfeit. Whoever spoke first, they agreed, should be the one to shut the door. There were 2 sofas in the room, and the pair settled themselves face to face, one on each, sitting mutely looking at one another. They had been in this posture for 2 or 3 hours, when a party of thieves came by and noticed that the door was open. The robbers crept into the silent house, which seemed so deserted, and began to load themselves with every portable object of any value which they could find. The bridal couple heard them come in, but each thought that the other should attend to the matter. Neither of them spoke or moved as the burglars went from room to room, until at length they entered the sitting room, and at first failed to notice the utterly motionless couple. Still the pair sat there, while the thieves collected all the valuables, and even rolled up the carpets under them. Mistaking the idiot and his stubborn wife for wax dummies, they stripped them of their personal jewels, and still the couple said nothing at all. The thieves made off, and the bride and her groom sat on their sofas throughout the night. Neither would give up. When daylight came, a policeman on his beat saw the open street door and walked into the house. Going from room to room, he finally came upon the pair and asked them what was happening. Neither man nor wife deigned to reply. The police called massive reinforcements, and the swarming custodians of the law became more and more enraged at the total silence, which to them seemed obviously a calculated affront. The officer in charge at last lost his temper and called out to one of his men, "Give that man a blow or two and get some sense out of him." At this, the wife could not restrain herself. "Please, kind officers," she cried, "do not strike him. He is my husband." "I won," shouted the fool immediately, "so you have to shut the door." Childe Roland. How can an ancient Inca story have been current in Shakespeare's time as an English folk tale, mentioned in King Lear? A Guatemalan Indian provided the traditional materials for the Popol Vuh for the Spanish conquerors containing this story. It was described by Louis Spence as the only Native American work that has come down to us from pre-Columbian times. It features a game with a ball, and the penetration of the underground headquarters of magically endowed people, who capture mortals by two young heirs to a gracious lady for the purpose of a battle. An advisor warns of the essential taboos to be respected, and the evil ones are vanquished. Each one of these ingredients and incidents, in the same order and down to the detail of the ball game being the cause of the trouble, is preserved in the Scottish version of Childe Roland, recited by a tailor in 1770, and preserved in the version given here by the folklorist Joseph Jacobs. As if this were not enough, Childe Roland also has illustrious literary relationships. In addition to Shakespeare's reference, Browning wrote a poem with this title, and the plot of the story is almost identical with that of Milton's Comus. Jacobs noted the affinity with Comus in 1899, and averred that the resemblance could hardly be a coincidence. He would perhaps have been equally surprised if he had noted the South American version. It was published by Spence in 1913, and although Jacobs died in 1916, apparently he did not see it. When I mentioned the resemblance to Louis Spence in the 1940s, he had not seen Jacobs' version either. Childe Roland and his brothers twain were playing at the ball, and there was their sister Burd Ellen in the midst among them all. Childe Roland kicked it with his foot and caught it with his knee. At last he plunged among them all, o'er the church he made it flee. Burd Ellen round about the aisle to seek the ball is gone, and long they waited, and longer still, and she came not back again. They sought her east, they sought her west, they sought her up and down, and woe were the hearts of those brethren, for she was not to be found. So at last her elder brother went to the warlock Merlin, the magician, told him all, and asked him if he knew where Burd Ellen was. "The fair Burd Ellen," said the warlock Merlin, "must have been carried off by the fairies, because she went round the church widdershins, the opposite way to the sun. She is now in the dark tower of the king of Elfland. It would take the boldest knight in Christendom to bring her back." "If it is possible to bring her back," said her brother, "I'll do it, or perish in the attempt." "Possible it is," said the warlock Merlin, "but woe to the man or mother's son that attempts it, if he is not well taught beforehand what he is to do. The eldest brother of Burd Ellen was not to be put off by any fear of danger from attempting to get her back, so he begged the warlock Merlin to tell him what he should do, and what he should not do in going to seek his sister. And after he had been taught and had repeated his lesson, he set out for Elfland. But long they waited, and longer still, with muckle doubt and pain. But woe were the hearts of his brethren, for he came not back again. Then the second brother got tired of waiting, and he went to the warlock Merlin and asked him the same as his brother. So he set out to find Burd Ellen. But long they waited, and longer still, with muckle doubt and pain. And woe were his mother's and brother's heart, for he came not back again. And when they had waited and waited a good long time, Childe Roland, the youngest of Burd Ellen's brothers, wished to go, and went to his mother, the good queen, to ask her to let him go. But she would not at first, for he was the last and dearest of her children, and if he were lost, all would be lost. But he begged, till at last the good queen let him go, and gave him his father's good brand, sword, that never struck in vain, and as she girt it round his waist, she said the spell that would give it victory. So Childe Roland said good-bye to the good queen, his mother, and went to the cave of the warlock Merlin. Once more, and but once more, he said to the warlock, tell how man or mother's son may rescue Burd Ellen and her brothers twain. Well, my son, said the warlock Merlin, there are but two things, simple they may seem, but hard they are to do. One thing to do, and one thing not to do. And the thing you do is this. After you have entered the land of Faery, whoever speaks to you, till you meet the Burd Ellen, you must out with your father's brand and off with their head. And what you've not to do is this. Bite no bit, and drink no drop, however hungry or thirsty you be. Drink a drop, or bite a bit, while in Elfland you be, and never will you see Middle-earth again. So Childe Roland said the two things over and over again, till he knew them by heart, and he thanked the warlock Merlin, and went on his way. And he went along, and still further along, till he came to the horse-herd of the king of Elfland, feeding his horses. These he knew by their fiery eyes, and knew that he was at last in the land of the Faery. Canst thou tell me, said Childe Roland to the horse-herd, where the king of Elfland's dark tower is? I cannot tell thee, said the horse-herd, but go on a little further, and thou wilt come to the cow-herd, and he maybe can tell thee. Then, without a word more, Childe Roland drew the good brand that never struck in vain, and off went the horse-herd's head. And Childe Roland went on further, till he came to the cow-herd, and asked him the same question. I can't tell thee, said he, but go on a little further, and thou wilt come to the henwife, and she is sure to know. Then Childe Roland out with his good brand, that never struck in vain, and off went the cowherd's head. And he went on a little further, till he came to an old woman in a grey cloak, and he asked her if she knew where the dark tower of the king of Elfland was. Go on a little further, said the henwife, till you come to a round green hill surrounded with terrace rings from the bottom to the top. Go round it 3 times widdershins, and each time say, open door, and let me come in. And the 3rd time the door will open, and you may go in. And Childe Roland was just going on, when he remembered what he had to do. So he out with the good brand that never struck in vain, and off went the henwife's head. Then he went on, till he came to the round green hill with the terrace rings from top to bottom, and he went round it 3 times widdershins, saying each time, open, door, open, and let me come in. and the third time the door did open, and he went in, and it closed with a click, and Childe Roland was left in the gloom. It was not exactly dark, but a kind of twilight or gloaming. There were neither windows nor candles, and he could not make out where the twilight came from, if not through the walls and roof. These were rough arches made of a transparent rock, encrusted with sheep silver and rock spar and other bright stones. But though it was rock, the air was quite warm, as it always is in Elfland. So he went through this passage, till at last he came to two wide and high folding doors which stood ajar. And when he opened them, there he saw a most wonderful and gracious sight. A large and spacious hall, so large it seemed to be as long and as broad as the green hill itself. The roof was supported by fine pillars, so large and lofty that the pillars of a cathedral were as nothing to them. They were all of gold and silver with fretted work, and between them and around them wreaths of flowers composed of diamonds and emeralds and all manner of precious stones. And the very keystones of the arches had for ornaments clusters of diamonds and rubies and pearls and other precious stones. And all these arches met in the middle of the roof, and just there, hung by a golden chain, an immense lamp made out of one big pearl, hollowed out and quite transparent. And in the middle of this was a big, huge carbuncle gem, which kept spinning round and round, and this was what gave light by its rays to the whole hall, which seemed as if the setting sun were shining on it. The hall was furnished in a manner equally grand, and at one end of it was a glorious couch of velvet, silk, and gold, and there sat Burd Ellen, combing her golden hair with a silver comb. And when she saw Childe Roland, she stood up and said, "God pity ye, poor luckless fool, what have ye here to do? Hear ye this, my youngest brother, why didn't ye bide at home? Had you 100,000 lives, ye couldn't spare any a one. But sit ye down, but woe, oh woe, that ever ye were born, for come the King of Elfland in, your fortune is forlorn." Then they sat down together, and Childe Roland told her all that he had done, and she told him how their two brothers had reached the Dark Tower, but had been enchanted by the King of Elfland, and lay there entombed as if dead. And then after they had talked a little longer, Childe Roland began to feel hungry from his long travels, and told his sister Burd Ellen how hungry he was, and asked for some food, forgetting all about the warlock Merlin's warning. Burd Ellen looked at Childe Roland sadly, and shook her head, but she was under a spell, and could not warn him. So she rose up and went out, and soon brought back a golden basin full of bread and milk. Childe Roland was just going to raise it to his lips, when he looked at his sister, and remembered why he had come all that way. So he dashed the bowl to the ground, and said, "Not a sup will I swallow, nor a bit will I bite, till Burd Ellen is set free." Just at that moment they heard the noise of someone approaching, and a loud voice was heard saying, "Fee, fi, fo, fum, I smell the blood of a Christian man. Be he dead, be he living, with my brand, I'll dash his brains from his brain pan." And then the folding doors of the hill were burst open, and the King of Elfland rushed in. "Strike then, bogey, or goblin, if you darest," shouted out Childe Roland, and rushed to meet him with his good brand that never yet did fail. They fought, and they fought, and they fought, till Childe Roland beat the King of Elfland down on his knees, and caused him to yield and beg for mercy. "I grant thee mercy," said Childe Roland. "Release my sister from thy spells, and raise my brothers to life, and let us all go free, and thou shalt be spared." "I agree," said the elfin king, and rising up he went to a chest from which he took a phial filled with a blood-red liquor. With this he anointed the ears, eyelids, nostrils, lips, and fingertips of the two brothers, and they sprang at once into life, and declared that their souls had been away, but had now returned. The elfin king then said some words to Burd Ellen, and she was disenchanted, and they all four passed out of the hall, through the long passage, and turned their back on the dark tower, never to return again. So they reached home, and the good queen their mother and Burd Ellen never went round a church widdershins again.